Hello, I'm Saifedean Ammous. Welcome to the Bitcoin Standard Podcast, bringing you seminars from Saifedean.com, my online learning and publishing platform where you can be the first to read my work and take my online courses on Bitcoin and Austrian economics. Members can read the draft of my next book, The Fiat Standard, in full, and also receive chapters from my forthcoming textbook, Principles of Economics, as they are written. By joining Saifedean.com, you can also join our regular seminars which you hear on this podcast. The Bitcoin Standard Podcast is brought to you by BitMEX Spot, the brand new spot exchange from BitMEX. You've probably heard of BitMEX, one of the oldest large Bitcoin companies, who played a leading role in helping Bitcoin emerge victorious from the hard fork wars of 2017. Their derivatives trading platform has stood the test of time and set the standard for reliability and performance for Bitcoin companies. BitMEX is now bringing that reliability to its spot exchange, and it is celebrating the launch of BitMEX Spot with a total of $1 million in prizes and a first prize of $500,000. Sign up on bitmex.com/Saifedean to begin buying Bitcoin and get a chance of winning. Coinbits. Coinbits is a great way to introduce your pre-coiner friends and family to Bitcoin. Get them set up in under a minute and help kickstart their journey by turning everyday spare change into Bitcoin. This Bitcoin-only app takes the uncertainty and fear out of Bitcoin saving by rounding up debit and credit card purchases to the nearest dollar, then using the difference to buy Bitcoin. Set it, forget it, and let the app automatically tax your high-time preference spending by saving the hardest money ever. Want to save in Bitcoin faster? Customers can multiply their roundups up to 10x or adjust their savings frequency for weekly or daily Bitcoin stacking. Coinbits is built on a sound, tried and true dollar cost averaging strategy that turns Bitcoin's volatility in your favor. Once you've gotten a private wallet set up, Coinbits encourages you to withdraw your Bitcoin to your own private wallet and embrace the Bitcoin standard way of life. Start stacking on coinbitsapp.com and save your time and energy in the soundest money ever. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Standard Podcast. My guest today is Amjad Masad, the CEO of Replit. Amjad is an old friend of mine from Amman, Jordan, and he's a Jordanian-American entrepreneur and engineer. He's the founder and CEO of Replit, the world's leading online programming environment and community. And before Replit, Amjad worked at Facebook, some company I think some of you may have heard of it, small startup, overseeing the JavaScript infrastructure team and building some of the world's most popular open source developer tools. And before that, he was a founding engineer at Code Academy, the world's leading online coding school. And as a nice little bonus to top all of this off, he is also a Bitcoiner. So Amjad, welcome.
I'm happy to be here. Been a big fan of Safe, the Bitcoin Standard, and all this stuff for a long time. I actually started noticing Bitcoin, I think, in the block wars days, and you were like a big figure during that, and I started going down the rabbit hole. And then you have this. I was like sort of looking at Bitcoin like a lot of noobs look at Bitcoin as that. Okay, it's this is like this internet payment thing. And there's all these block wars, all these people are fighting. I don't know what's going on there. So I sort of ignored it for a long time. And then when I started reading your message and like what you were talking about Bitcoin and the kind of mental model you bring to Bitcoin, it really resonated with me and immediately clicked, and sort of been going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole since then. And so thank you for getting me into Bitcoin.
Thank you, sir. I'm delighted to hear that. I'm very, very happy to hear it. So I wanted to talk to you today about Replit, your startup, and how it got started, and also about coding in general and your ideas about why people should learn to code. I'd like to convince a lot of my listeners to quit their bullshit jobs and code. So to begin on that quest, let's begin with your story. Tell us about your background, how you learned to code, why you chose this thing as opposed to other things you could have done with your time, and how that then led you to Replit.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Amman, and like you, we come from a Palestinian descent, and my father is a Palestinian Jordanian. As you know, Palestinians have put this huge value in education. And so he's an engineer, and engineering in our family has been like this big thing, lots of engineers. And although he sort of grew up in poverty and became a successful engineer working in government and the municipality of Amman, And when I was about 6 years old, he had this curiosity about computers. And although he didn't have a lot of money, again, he was just an engineer in the government, which didn't pay well at all. He kind of stretched himself to get a computer because he knew that was kind of the way of the future, and he wanted to learn it, and he wanted for us to experience it as well. And so one of my first vivid memories in Amman was kind of looking at my father and his friend kind of unbox this mysterious machine. And I remember my curiosity peaked then. And then as they plug it in and I see the Microsoft DOS kind of prompt, and I immediately almost understood that, you're like, as you're typing to the keyboard, you're having this conversation with this machine, with this computer. And I would look behind my father's back and see him like trying to learn how to do basic like DOS commands like CD, mkdir, and moving files around, whatever. And my father's, is kind of a book guy. And so he would like, read the manual end to end. I would see him at night kind of banging his head against it. And for me, I guess I had the more hacker sort of mindset to it. So after he's done with the computer, I would sneak back into the room and I would start the computer. I would like do the commands that I saw them do. And I sort of instinctively got how the computer acted. And I sort of could think in the sort of language of the computer. And I remember my father walking on me and getting really mad because he didn't know how to work this computer. And for me, like a 6-year-old, to be able to actually have this proficiency in being able to run programs and all of that. And then I was like, wait, I know how to run this. And I sort of showed him. And since then I've been showing him how to use computers. But that was like the thing that really kicked off everything, because I've just been obsessed with computers and programming since then. And when I was 13 years old, I was playing a lot of Counter-Strike. I don't know if you remember, Saif, but there was this period in Jordan where there's all these LAN internet cafes where you kind of go and play games and go online and whatever, and everyone was doing it. And I got super obsessed in it. I mean, that's sort of a personality trait that I have. Anything that I start doing, I just get super obsessed, and I got really good at Counter-Strike. But one thing that bothered me is like every time I go to these places, they run everything manually. And so, you go there, you pay 1-2 JDs to get an hour on the computer, and then they write your, name in a notebook, and then you go sit down on the computer, you use it for an hour. And then, the store clerk will like look at the clock, look at the notebook, and figure out, whether your time is done, and then go tap you on the shoulder. I thought it was incredibly dumb because, there's computers everywhere. And you really didn't need like a staff of 10 people to run like a store with 30 computers. And was like, okay, like if I wrote software, this will make it run much more efficiently. It'll make it more secure, because people would like, mess around and like format the computer and do all these destructive things. So I wrote a piece of software that managed these LAN and internet cafe centers where you get a username and password, you get an account with the number of hours. So you could like pay. You could pay for an hour, that goes into your account. You could also do things like discounts. You could say like, I'm going to pay for 20 hours. I'm going to get like a 50% discount. And so the store could do these kind of things. I implemented some accounting systems for them as well. So they could look at their projections. And
how old were you when you were doing all this?
14, 15. Like
Okay.
I started working on it when I was 13. I actually didn't get to market until I was 15. So it required this like 2 years of intense focus. I remember my friends Bilhara in the neighborhood who I used to play a lot outside, and suddenly I just disappeared. And for 2 years, they didn't see me. And they were like asking my brother, like, what happened to Amjad? Is he dead? And I would just like every day come back from school, or sometimes run away from school, or not show up to school to just like program. And I was like programming, 8 hours a day. I was not sleeping, 12 hours sometimes. It was really hard because I didn't have internet as well. So I would walk a couple miles to the nearest internet cafe, and I would scrap whatever money I could find at home or whatever, and then like go look up code and then kind of write it down on a piece of paper, run back home and try to implement the code. So it took a long time, but eventually got it to market. And all the stores were using it. It was spreading really fast. I did this thing where I would sell the software, but I would also sell services on top of the software. So I thought it would like increase the value of the software, make the switching cost higher. And so I would sell you the software, but also maintain your computers, because I got really good at IT as well. So I could do formatting of like 30 computers, and I could do an image and do all of that stuff. And so I was balling for a 15-year-old kid. I remember when McDonald's first opened in Amman Mall, I would take my entire class to McDonald's and just like buy everyone McDonald's. And I really made a whole lot of money doing that. And so that was really my first production application, my first business. I had this period where I thought that like, okay, I'm the god of programming. I don't need to do any more programming. I don't need to learn it. And the other idea that I had, which is interesting because I'm working on it now, is that programming is going to get automated, which was like way like crazy stupid of an idea then. But I thought it was like programming is this like rote mechanical thing. Like I know how to do it pretty well. And so eventually computers will know how to do it. So if computers will know how to do programming, and we can talk about why it's all wrong now, but maybe I should learn something else. So I got into computer engineering. I started doing more hardware stuff. And then I got into IT. I started working in IT. And then I went to Princess Sumaya University, which is the best kind of computer engineering, computer science university in the region. And after a while, I sort of realized that programming is this thing that's not only going to be relevant for the future, it's like possibly the last thing to be relevant. So it's the last thing to be automated, because if you automate programming fully, then you automate everything, because then the machine can program the next machine to do whatever task you want it to do. And so I realized not only programming is going to be this big thing, but I realized that it has the potential to really transform the world, and software was going to be this thing that's going to grow really big, and that it's going to have the potential to really give people opportunities from anywhere in the world. Like if, a kid from Jordan can really make a lot of money and build a career for themselves really quickly, then it has this potential to, potentially lift people out of poverty and really decentralize the ability to make things and create businesses. And that's how, like, sort of my thinking around why it's important and why I want to dedicate my career to making it more accessible.
Yeah. So you moved your thinking from software to hardware and then back to software again. And then how'd you get into Facebook?
So,
there was Yahoo first before Facebook, right?
Yeah. So in school, when I was doing computer science, when I switched back to software, I immediately found this really hard thing with learning how to code, which is every time you learn a programming language or like take a class, say object-oriented programming in Java or C, you have to learn how to do these very annoying, tedious IT tasks. You have to install what's called a compiler, the thing that would transform your code, your high-level code into machine code. You have to install an interpreter. You have to install packages, software packages that are distributed either open source or by the company making the programming languages, and then like maybe multiple hours later and gigabytes later, you would start writing your first line of code, and then God forbid you want to share that piece of code. You want to share it with your professor. They might have a missing DLL or a missing library or whatever. They might have a different version of the compiler or interpreter, and it was just this hellish thing. And I didn't have a laptop at the time. I just couldn't afford it, and so I had a computer at home, computer at the office, and I had to use a computer lab at school, and I had to do the song and dance everywhere I went. And I thought I was like, why can't I just like open a new browser window and start coding? And so that's how the idea behind Replit and a lot of the other stuff I started working on started. And I started searching for it and I couldn't find it. And at the time, you had these new in-browser applications, cloud-based applications, becoming mainstream. Google Doc, I think in 2009, 10 was kind of growing really fast. And so I thought, like, naturally there's going to be a code editor in the browser. So I didn't find one. And so I started writing one. And so that's like very naively started writing a code editor in the browser and interpreter, and then ran into fundamental issues. One is that the browser can run only one language, which is JavaScript. And it because it's a secure sandbox, you can't really compile any piece of code and run it in your browser. And also the browser did not have the tools to actually write code in them. And so I embarked on this, again, multi-year journey of building a browser console, so you can type in some code and interact with the computer, and compiling different languages into the browser's language, JavaScript. So in 2010, 2011, I had a breakthrough where we were the first to use this very nascent technology that's now sort of mainstream, which allowed you to compile native languages like C and C++ into JavaScript. And so this was somewhat of a fundamental breakthrough. And me and some people at school that I recruited, we open sourced, and that was the predecessor to Replit. We open sourced that technology. And it went just super viral. It was on Hacker News, it was Reddit, Slashdot. And we started getting this crazy attention from all over the world. And, we're like two kids, from Jordan, like even the inventor of JavaScript, was talking about it. It was presented at conferences. I actually didn't know how big of an impact it was going to make. And so I wanted to start a company around it, but it was really hard to do that back then in Jordan. So I took a job at Yahoo, which at the time acquired Maktub, the first sort of Arabic email company. And so I was working there. I really didn't like my job, so I was spending most of my time on building this technology. And then Code Academy used our open source technologies to build their in-browser kind of learning experience. And so Code Academy in 2011 was the first fully interactive programming lesson based on some of the open source technologies that I built. And so the company was just these two guys, and they wanted to hire me. They were just graduated Y Combinator class of 2011. And that was very appealing to me because it's only two people. Maybe I could be somewhat of a founder because I wanted to start my own business. But I still was really determined on building the business. The thing that made it really hard was in Jordan. Venture capital was like really non-existent at the time, and I didn't have any money to fund this. It didn't have a clear monetization path. I knew there's something there, and so the founders of Code Academy came to Jordan and recruited me, and they gave me a lot of shares in the company, and got me an O1 visa, which is a visa you get for inventors and the like. And so got an O1 visa, moved to New York City. And Saif, maybe you and I actually overlapped in New York City a little bit because you were in Colombia. I know we have some shared friends. Yeah, and so yeah, that was my entry to the United States. And then I worked 2 years at Code Academy, and then I left and decided to join Facebook. And the reason I wanted to join Facebook was not because I was fond of the Blue app. Zuck at the time was talking about the vision for internet.org. So internet.org was this vision of connecting all the world's population. And so, it fit this idea that I had where computers and the internet as devices for personal empowerment and individual wealth creation. And I wanted to work on that. So I joined on Facebook. That project turned out to be turned out to be more of a marketing, I guess, thing. And so ended up working on developer tools again. So at Facebook, I worked on React.js, which is the world's most popular JavaScript front-end framework right now. I worked in React Native, which is the world's most popular mobile framework right now. And so this period that I joined Facebook, started working on open source developer tools, was one of the most productive periods at Facebook because we invented a ton of tools at the time. And stayed at Facebook for 3 years doing that.
Okay. And then that leads us to Replit. How did you then decide to do Replit, and what does Replit do?
Yeah, so the original idea was, back in 2008, 2009, going to school and, running into all these issues, trying to just like do my homework. And, we had released this open source project, and it had a good amount of users. I sort of abandoned it when I was working at Code Academy and Facebook. My wife at the time, my wife right now, she's a designer, and she was trying to get a job, and she wanted to have like some kind of side project, some kind of project in her portfolio. And she was looking for a project, and I was like, okay, I'll help you. We can work on something together. And she kind of brought up the idea of like potentially working on Replit again. And she's like, okay, you have this thing. It's clearly people love it. Like, why don't we work on it? I'm like, it's kind of old and needs a lot of work to get it back and all of that. Eventually she convinced me. And so we started talking to the users that were using that project from 2011. And there was like a dedicated, 5,000 monthly users on it. We're like, okay, we can use this as a launching ground and build something better. So in 2015, 2016, my role at Facebook was coming to a natural conclusion. And I started kind of investing nights and weekends into this side project. And we rewrote everything, relaunched it as Replit, and started growing almost immediately because the need was still there. Like, nobody had, like, imagine that, like, in the 5 years we've left it to rot, nobody had filled the need. Of course there was Code Academy, and Code Academy had like 50 million users and started making money and all of that. But the need for a cloud programming environment that abstracted away all the nonsense from starting to code and made it really easy to share code, made it really, really easy to code together, made it easy to launch applications, and had a community around it, really was not a thing that anyone had done. And I was actually surprised that the original vision was not fulfilled by someone else, because it just seemed obvious to me. And so when things started working, the initial use case for Replit was that I want to learn how to code, and I don't want to set up my development environment just yet. I don't know how to do it. And you get on Replit and you start learning how to code. I am a teacher. I want to teach a group of students. You just give them Replit links, and you just saved yourself multiple days and weeks of headaches. And so it immediately had this appeal. And then our vision for it over time kind of started crystallizing, which is we want a place where you write your first line of code in 2 seconds. Like, you sign up in 2 seconds, you start writing your first line of code, all the way to building your first application, getting your first users, and in the future also monetizing your application, getting your first dollar. So kind of this is the original vision that I was talking about that I had years ago, and when I was 20, which is a kind of software as this means of individual actualization. And I think we're building that at Replit now. We have a lot of stories of people doing that.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I want to get into this in more detail, but a little bit of a side question here. I'm wondering, what do you think would have worked better if... do you think the fact that you released this as open source code and this giant community developed around it, even though you weren't monetizing it, actually helped this thing grow, so that when 5 years later, I think it was, that you came back and decided to open the startup around it, it was better? So do you think it would have been better if you had the resources at the beginning to not release this as open source and to try and monetize it from day one? Or do you think you actually got an advantage with the fact that this giant community had learned to play with this thing for free?
I think a lot about that. And I think that if I had the resources, the talent, like the talent around me, the capital, if I had been born in the US and had access to Silicon Valley, um, I would have probably made a lot of progress earlier on. I think Replit would be much further along. But given the circumstances that I had, I think like there was no other way it would have spread, right? Like the cool thing about open source is that it's viral, like it spreads really quickly. People just like remix it and use it in their own projects. Your reputation grows super quickly as well. With if you make one useful open source project, you're immediately put on the map. Like I started getting job opportunities from Google, Amazon, all these things, just because like, my reputation was like, someone who made this open source, very useful open source project. And I would say, given the some circumstances, it's very path dependent. Like it's hard to think about the counterfactual where like I built the startup in Jordan or something like that. But I think just like putting out the open source project, having the idea become more normalized. Because one of the things that I got a lot of pushback on, and you might recognize that, given Bitcoin's the pushback for Bitcoin, but it's like, why do I need this? I'm used to coding. I'm used to coding in my local IDE. You're corrupting the youth, right? Because they don't use like the tools.
Back in my day, we had to make our own development environment, right?
Right, exactly, exactly. Like it's totally that, and so we had to deal with all that pushback. And so I think making it open source and letting it percolate and normalize, it benefited not only us but everyone in the space. And so that's another reason why I think doing it as open source is good. And maybe one last thing is, and as when we talk about people learning code and getting jobs and everything, I think one thing that you find consistently in software entrepreneurs and just software developers in general is that a lot of the ideas that start as an experiment, as a side project, end up becoming a really big thing, right? Whether it's Steve Jobs in the garage or Mark Zuckerberg in their dorm room. A lot of these ideas just start as experimentation. Maybe even Satoshi's white paper was essentially just a curiosity, and a lot of it ends up being really big. So I think that another benefit of having as this open source side project is that I didn't commit entirely to it initially, and it was this increasing level of commitment over time as it paid off. Without it, I wouldn't have come to the US, right? And without it, I wouldn't have joined Code Academy, which ended up being really meaningful for my career financially as well. And so again, there's all these reasons why that was the right decision.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a harder sell to get people to get people to get over these objections for a paid product than it is for an open source product. And maybe this was the only way that you could have achieved any kind of scale, enough to get enough eyeballs to look at it and to iterate on it and to give feedback, which maybe you needed to grow as a developer, and it needed to grow as an idea for you to then reunite a little bit later.
Totally,
yeah, and I think I'm a big fan of open source, and I don't believe in intellectual property. Again, a little bit of a distraction on our main topic, but what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there should be intellectual property on code, or do you think it's just numbers and people should be free to copy them any way they want?
Like so. I sort of understand your viewpoint. Like anytime you make something property, you need to have the means of defending that property, and maybe from first principles, it's hard to understand how to actually defend intellectual property without like a big big state and a lot of rules and a lot of mess. I think if you enter a contract with someone and you work with them on a certain set of ideas and designs and code, for you to just like copy that and go start your own thing, that's I think that seems wrong. And so maybe it's a contractual thing rather than like a blanket intellectual property thing. But I think definitely like you should not be able to steal intellectual property, designs, code, whatever, right? But maybe that's, well, I guess what's your opinion on contractually not being able to take
I think things? Contractually, I think it's perfectly fine for people to develop ways of protecting their trade secrets. So you come work for me, you sign a contract that says you can't share this information or copy this data or copy this software, and that if you do, there are specific punishments. You have to pay me this much as a fine or so on. So I think these things can be arranged consensually, and I think the idea of it's one of those many things that sounds nice in principle. If we just have the government interfere in the market in this magical way, then we can get more of a good thing and we can get rid of a bad thing. But in reality, all it does is it distorts people's economic incentives, and so people act around it in a way that ends up exacerbating the problem. So in this case, it seems like, all right, when somebody invents something, that we give them the right to profit from it, and that's going to incentivize people to invent more. But I think it works the other way around, because what it does is that, it's not about inventing things. It's about proving to the court and using lawyers to prove that you're the one who invented things. So then, as you see today, it's just essentially competitive lawyering with very high stakes. And you see it in pharmaceuticals, you see it in code, like the coder and the researcher who's making the drug, they're getting paid peanuts compared to what the companies who are able to marshal the lawyers and the lobbyists and all of this political stuff around it can marshal. So I think this ends up working counterproductively to the goal of innovation. If you wanted innovation, you would want freedom in information so that people can use their information whatever they want in whichever way they want. And I think in that way, people who come up with good ideas will still find ways of monetizing it. Like you don't need to make it part of your business model that people will get thrown in jail if they do something with your products. Find a way to structure your product that doesn't involve throwing your users in jail in certain conditions. I mean, it sounds completely alien to people that grew up in a Microsoft world where, the key part of the business model is that we need to throw people in jail if they copy. But I believe there is a possibility to profit without it. I think, piracy, and this is something I practice myself. I encourage people to pirate my book. Always. I don't mind people pirating my book. I think it's great. It's great marketing. It leads to more sales. But yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with all that. And I think as a startup, it actually commits you to that worldview just by virtue of not having the resources that like a Microsoft has, right? Like a lot of the good things about startups actually is because you're somewhat starved for resources. And so you need to do things to protect yourself, and you need to do things to not preclude yourself from monetizing your work in the future, which is like actually turns out to be super hard. Like there are a lot of companies that have built amazing technologies, end up being a public good and not being able to monetize it. And now they're doing a lot of license shenanigans. So for example, I think MongoDB recently changed their license to basically say that anyone that like you can use MongoDB freely, but you can provide it as a service. And basically they're protecting themselves against AWS providing Mongo as service. And so there's a lot of this license wrangling in order to create certain competitive advantage in the market. But I think it's sort of a strategic failure from the start not to have seen that, the consequences of your strategy. And so I think there's Silicon Valley tech in general tend to overemphasize execution and underemphasize strategy, which might have been the right thing to do when in the dot-com bubble, like you had all these MBAs with fancy strategy that didn't go anywhere, and then you really had to emphasize the tech instead of the strategy. But now I think we're on the other side where people execute beautifully and on like really flawed strategies. And so I always like to think, and by the way, Replit is not an easy thing to monetize, and we're iterating on a lot of different experiments to figure out what's the best way to monetize it. But we've had certain foresight on to create the conditions for us to maintain the ability to monetize. So I absolutely agree with that, and I think any company that starts with the assumption that they can protect their intellectual property via force is again, unless someone breaks a contract, which I think is something you should be able to enforce. Like otherwise, if there's no contractual, if we can't enforce contracts, like you can't really do business. But other than that, if your way of producing value in the world is relying on the state to kind of protect your intellectual property, I think is a flawed strategy.
Yeah, I agree. And I people will say that, okay, well, this kind of intellectual property is what has given us Microsoft as an interoperable desktop platform for people all over the world to use. And in a sense, protecting Windows built that, but I don't think it was the intellectual property and the protections that were given to Windows that gave that. What gave us that is the fact that people want to be on compatible networks. Everybody wants to be on the same network that can connect to everybody else, and so you're likely going to end up with an implementation that is compatible among computers. And the reason, and I think we can never really tell what the alternative would have been, but I think if Microsoft did not have this much money and did not have this many lawyers and did not have the ability to stop people from copying its code, then Bill Gates would probably not be worth $200 billion today. He might be worth $5 billion, $1 billion maybe. I mean, that sounds like a tragedy, I know. But I think I could live in a world in which Bill Gates is worth 5% of what he's worth right now. But I think the alternative would have been that there'd have been, 1,000 other Bill Gates who made small, tiny little incremental improvements and a much wider variety and bigger variety of ecosystem of desktop applications and that are compatible, but that are being monetized in all kinds of different ways. Somebody offers it in a certain language with a certain support. And I think, it wouldn't be distributed in this way where you have one big winner and then everybody else is paying their $399 a year. You'd have free versions and premium versions and a lot of businesses and a lot of progress. And I think it would be a lot better than the current Windows that we have. But who knows, I could be wrong.
Yeah, I actually think so. 2 points on that. One is like piracy absolutely benefit Microsoft, right? Because and the standard piracy benefited the PC standard, right? Because you had an install base that was so large. So as a developer, it just like made a lot of sense to target that, right? And so as a manufacturer, it made a lot of sense. So in a way, I think the piracy sort of propagated the standard. The other thing I would say is that like there's a world and Bill Gates would be actually richer if he focused on innovation as opposed to blowing up, right? So contrast that with Apple. I'm not entirely privy to Apple's history of litigation, whatever, but it just seems like they were more focused on innovation, right? So they invented the iPod and then the iPhone. Sort of later on, when Android copied iPhone, they were like stuck in these legal battles. But I think if Microsoft in the 90s and early 2000s was not so focused on a lot of the like non-innovative stuff you're talking about, just the corporate bullying, they actually would have been more innovative and created more products and services. I think if you're building a tech company, the way I think about it is that everything we do will be copied in some capacity. We have a lead time of 1 to 2, maybe 3 years. By the way, Replit is the first kind of fully from the ground up multiplayer programming environment. So multiple people can code together on the same machine, on the same editor. And we were the first to do that. And we thought it's like it's going to be the standard thing in a year or two. Actually, now 5-6 years or maybe 4 years later, since we released it in 2018, it's still like not the default thing. And if you go, speaking of Microsoft, if you go use Microsoft products like Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, they have rudimentary support for multiplayer coding, but it takes a lot of work to set it up. And with Replit, it's immediate. I just share the link and you get it. And a lot of people in this space, including Microsoft and others, are copying us. But I keep telling my team, we have to keep creating the next thing, because that's how we create the 2 or 3 year lead time. So like in your strategy, it should be embedded that you're copying. And so you need to work on your generator function, right? So you like, what makes a company so innovative? And, maybe the culture, it may be the talent. And so keep building that so that you get the next invention and the next invention and the next invention.
Yeah, I think here, to get to the fiat issue, of course, what I think fiat money does here, and that the kind of political system allowed by the intervention that is allowed by fiat money, makes this lawyering up so enormously profitable, because there's so many rules and so many regulations that the government can place because the government has infinite money. And so it pays to invest in lawyers. And I think, I don't know, looking at, for instance, Microsoft probably is guilty of this, but I think IBM is probably more guilty. You think about what they do. Essentially, they just buy up ideas. They're like a hedge fund. When was the last time you've heard of like an actual IBM engineered product? Obviously, I don't hear much, but you hear more because that's your field of business. So I may be wrong here, but I suspect they're just buying up small startups. Anybody who comes up with an innovative idea. You come up with that idea, you want to go to a bank. If you get a loan from the bank, they're going to give you a loan at 10, 12, 18, maybe 25%. But Microsoft or IBM can get it at 1, 2, 3 or so percent. So it makes a lot of sense because of the way that the fiat system works, because of the what we call interest rate apartheid, that all the capital ends up in the hands of the people who have low interest rates. So the big keep getting bigger, IBM and Microsoft keep getting bigger, and they don't have to innovate. They just need to keep buying everybody with a half good idea, because then you guarantee that all the good ideas you'll get.
Yeah, it's worse than that. Like IBM, I think, is at this point like a patent troll. Buy patents and sue people for money, or buy and sell patents. They're like a patent hedge fund. I think definitely Microsoft is a little better because Microsoft is not particularly innovating, but they buy things and they run them well, right? Like they bought GitHub, they're running GitHub relative, and so I think that produces better goods and services in the economy. So I don't think it's not bad, but like some companies are really just like net negative on society because all they do is that like rent seeking that you're talking about.
Yeah, I've asked for many years, what the hell does IBM do these days? And I failed to get a good answer from people. All I hear them talk about is, blockchain technology and putting tomatoes on the blockchain, or artificial intelligence stuff. Yeah, it's all buzzwords. And yeah, but if you can pump it onto the next sucker at an interest rate differential, then it's a good business model, especially when you're doing it at the trillions of dollars of scale. Right. But anyways, enough about the dying past. Let's focus on the future. Let's focus on Replit. Yeah. So how do you monetize? What is your monetization strategy currently?
So right now we sell a individual product where you get better performance, you get more hosting services, you get more cloud compute, you get more storage. For $7 a month, you get like a lot of the stuff, and it's like a really, really good deal. So that's one. Recently, we started also selling to teams, and so we earlier this year we released our Teams Pro product. We have also freemium Teams product, but that's companies are starting to adopt Replit to use it in their organizations to prototype, to code, to build, to interview other engineers. And we're working on another big idea, we think is going to be super valuable. I can't talk too much about it, but the idea is that we want to make it so that we give people opportunities to monetize their work, and maybe we share in some of that revenue. So one way to think about Replit is Replit is the consumerization of software development. And so we made something that created mass appeal for programming and software development. And that meant that we have a lot of hobbyists on the site. And all these hobbyists, we give them tools they wouldn't otherwise have it. We give them resources that makes them really productive and really valuable. And so, from a business perspective, we have this arbitrage opportunity on talent. And so we want to create an ecosystem where people can monetize their ideas, monetize their skills. And so that's the really big idea we're working on right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the potential here when thinking about the fact that you have all these creative people whose creative output is having to go through you because you're offering them essentially the best bargain rather than buying all the other stuff individually. I think the potential is enormous, which is why somebody like Paul Graham says about Replit that he thinks of it as being like a next Microsoft in terms of its potential. It's not. I think the way that he and you have said it is that it's not in terms of just the number of users that it can develop, but it's in terms of the number of the users of the users.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the apps that are hosted in Replit get something like 10 billion visits a month. Whereas our website gets on the order of millions. So that's like, multiple order of magnitude more traffic is going to the work of our creators than our website itself. And so it has this interesting second order effect on the internet.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. And so in 2019, you had an offer to be acquired for $1 billion. And so this is related to what we were saying earlier about big companies buying up companies. And you said no. Why?
Insanity is the kind of answer that I keep landing on. Look, I think part of it, part of it is like, I'm enjoying the work so much. It's, there's a lot of pain involved in it. And I think anything meaningful in life is going to be somewhat painful. But as I kind of look at my future, like, do I want to work at a big tech corporation and go to inclusion seminars and to I don't know what else they do, like read propaganda every
basically
day
beg the central bank for rolling over your credit every month.
Yeah, it's like ultimately, like, what kind of life we want for ourselves, and okay, money is good. I like money a lot, and you can do a lot with money. You can improve your life, you can improve the lives of people around you, you can do useful things, you can invest in the next venture. You're not reliant on external capital for that. But like, I like my current venture, so why leave it now? And I don't think I've reached my peak productivity yet. I'm still young, and I feel like I can build a lot more value. And so there wasn't a clear sort of reason to sell. And I think a lot of, as I talked to my mentors and everything, I think a lot of startups sell out of fear, because every acquisition offer, Saif, has an embedded threat in it, which is like, we will copy you, right? We're interested in this domain. We're interested in what you're doing. You either sell or we will copy you, And the question you have to answer for yourself is that, do you think they're going to be able to out execute you on the ideas you're working on the thing that you've dedicated yourself to? And the answer for me was like obviously no. Like, we're going to be able to execute faster, build more, do better things. And so that's another reason. I also just never quit. Like, I just quitting is like not a thing that registers to me, and that gets me into a lot of trouble sometimes. But I just like, to me, selling, at least in that context, felt like winning. I guess there are some situations where mergers make sense. You can continue to work on the thing, you get more scale, all of that. But it just didn't make sense. And I think, I think now, like, maybe we're already slightly vindicated because, people are paying a lot for the Replit stock, and everyone who's trying to invest in Replit, and so at the time we were really scrapping by, which made it an even irrational sort of way of irrational to say no. But I think now we're on our way to even bigger success.
Yeah, congratulations. That's the low time preference way. Give up the $1 billion in 2019 for many more in the future. It's the Marshmallow Experiment all over again. I guess another way of thinking of it is that, if you did take all of that money, well, maybe not all of it for you and you have partners, but if you did have a big chunk of money and you're 35, 37, something like that. What the hell are you going to do with all of that money and all that free time with the rest of your life? Like, you'd probably, if you had that situation, you'd find yourself thinking, hey, I should buy something like Replit and work on it. So if you'd have that feeling, then it doesn't make sense to sell.
Exactly.
Work on it. You only have one life.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought about. Yeah,
it's a waste to spend your life just spending money on a beach. Like, yeah, it's fun for the first day and week and month and year, but then there's more to life. Like, there's nothing. You're not going to get a lot of nice memories of your life if what you're left with is just wake up every morning and enjoy a beautiful beach. And challenge, no excitement, no stress about making a goal. Yeah, that stuff, you can't buy that with money.
Yeah, I don't think, like, I actually don't think that, like, at least for me, I never find true happiness in that sort of thing, in consumption. And I, like, sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe let me go splurge, or go spend money, see if like I get anything out of it. And most of the time, except cars, I love cars, but most of the time, I actually don't feel like I'm getting a lot of happiness from it. And like, you think about it, and there's short-term pleasure, and then there's long-term fulfillment, and like short-term pleasure is like fleeting. It's really like, you can't really hold on to it. And that's the low time, high time preference thing, is like, when you have this high time preference, you're stuck in this vicious consumption loop, because it's like everything is addictive. You eat tasty food and you want more of it. Your sugar spike and then crashes. You need more sugar. And like,
the same is true for expensive stuff that you spend your money on. If you get your fulfillment from consumption, there's really no limit to it. There's always another car. There's always a bigger yacht. There's always a bigger castle that you could buy. And it's not as fulfilling as production.
Exactly. And actually, this is embedded in sort of Replit's thesis, is that, we today have this internet of consumption, where Iranian blogger, who went to prison for some blog he did in like 2012 or 13. I forgot his name, but he got out in 2016, 17. And he first, like, he used the internet after like this long while. And he's like, he summed up what he thinks the internet has become, is like, it's become like a TV. Like, Facebook is like a TV now. TikTok is a TV. Like, it's a TV, but you have to do this. Like, so the internet was supposed to be this interactive creative medium. But instead, the way it's developing, it's like this purely consumption medium. And Replit is about bringing back creation. And so we want to have people learn how to create on the internet, so that they're not mere consumers. And again, I think, like you, it leads to a more fulfilling life if you're able to make things and not just consume things.
Oh, I agree entirely, and I think yeah, this is the dangerous thing about the internet, obviously, in that there's an infinite amount of distraction out there of TVs. TVs were boring before the internet. They had a few channels, and eventually you got bored of them, and then you had and then you had to maybe consider doing something with your life, especially when there were few TV channels. But now with the internet, there's an infinite amount of stuff for you to just keep scrolling through. But of course, like with everything, it has its bad side and its good side. And the good side of this is on the other side. There's an infinite opportunity for you to create, because all of these eyeballs are out there and they want things to scroll through. And it's an exciting time to get out there and actually do things that they're valued by, that these people value. So, what is your case for coding? Why should people learn to code? Particularly, I'm thinking, why should young kids learn to code? But I also want to ask for older people.
By the way, can I say something about
Sure, yeah.
About consumption vis-a-vis Bitcoin? Because I think it's an interesting thing. I think part of the reason we ended up in this, very consumptive culture around the internet is one where you can there's all these arguments that I think are true about like fiat and like easy money and all of that stuff. But also I think just the fact that the ad business model was developed as the primary business model of the internet had a lot of this deleterious effects on the architecture of the internet. So I think because value exchange was not possible, which is what Bitcoin brings to the internet, it made it so that the best way to monetize is through ads. And so one way to think about ads is that when I go on TikTok and I watch an ad, what I'm doing is I'm paying the company with my attention and with my time. Whereas if we had something like a native currency for the internet, and there's like the concept of micropayments or any kind of embedded payments, then the internet will be a more honest place because it's based on the age-old method of value transaction. You make something valuable for me, you create a piece of content that's valuable for me, I will buy it. And then you don't get into all these issues around algorithms and manipulation, trying to get people to stay as long as possible to watch as many ads as possible against their own good. And so I think the fact that the internet was missing, I think, is a huge bug that was missing like a native currency and native value exchange mechanism. And I think that's what Satoshi kind of fixed. And now we have a lot of entrepreneurs trying to build on Satoshi's work to actually bring that to full adoption.
You do offer Lightning development on Replit. I mean, a lot of people on your platform work on Lightning, right?
Yeah, there are some templates to do Lightning, and some people have created some Lightning apps. We want to make it easier. We're working with the folks from Spiral to create a very simple API. Right now, Lightning is very difficult. It's really, really difficult to get started with. And Replit is like the whole design aesthetic behind Replit is like things should be simple. I should do import Lightning to pay, Lightning receive, Lightning invoice, Lightning just basic functions. And right now that doesn't exist. So LDK, the Lightning development kit from Block, they have a new proposal for like a very simple high level API. And there are a lot of folks that are working on making Lightning more accessible and easy to use. Like there are projects like Sensei and other projects. And so we're working with the community now to really produce a simple API that, like, my design principle is like a 10-year-old it needs to be able to use it. And And so we're not there yet. And so like I expect sometime later this year we'll have this like native Lightning integration, but it needs to be a lot easier. So there's more work to do there, both in the open source community and on Replit's side. But we already do have people kind of experimenting with Bitcoin on the platform. There are like a ton of templates and community content around that. We also run perhaps the world's first Bitcoin-based venture fund. And so we invest in startups by sending them Bitcoin. It's sort of like on a small scale because a lot of our entrepreneurs are young and still starting out. So I think we give them something like $10,000 worth of Bitcoin to go work on something, and some of the things they work on is also Bitcoin related. And yeah, but we're just big believers, and I think it's going to be a big part of our story. The other big thing I care about is like Bitcoin as means of wealth preservation. And so, I talked about wealth creation. So I want, like, the North Star for Replit is to reduce the distance between an idea and wealth. So I think, right now, the distance between having an idea and then going through the motions of learning how to building it, and then eventually releasing it and then making money out of it. I will reduce that. I will reduce that to, the shortest possible distance. And maybe in the future, it's going to be, instead of, years, maybe it's going to be a month or two, maybe even days. As people make money on Replit, we need a way for them to store it, in a way that is not, in a way that is portable, a way that's inclusive, that allows anyone to accumulate wealth, and a way that is self-sovereign. And I think Bitcoin is the only way I can think of that kind of hit these goals.
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful case that you make there, and I think it fits perfectly because, the incredible capability of what you're doing, of just having an army of all of these people all over the world who are learning essentially the superpower of clicking on a keyboard and making machines do things. It's an enormous ecosystem, and of course, the speed and the frequency at which these people are producing things and transacting, and their machines are moving stuff, and engaging in economic activities, is far beyond the fiat monetary system to keep up with. It's very difficult to do that, especially since all of these people, they're in different countries. You've got coders in countries that are under sanctions. You've got people whose banking system is currently being destroyed, and you can't like it's like trying to run a modern car engine by putting it on a horse and then hoping the horse gets faster. It just doesn't fit with it almost. So then with this native network that's online, where you have Lightning as very cheap transactions and that can be sent very quickly all over the world, I think the possibilities are just really exciting. So it's very, very interesting to look at how this is going to develop over time. So what is your case for coding? Why should people learn to code?
So at base, I think the case for coding is the same case for mathematics or any basic skill. Like when humans transitioned from a primarily hunter-gatherer society where everyone learned how to hunt and gather, to an agricultural society, people learned how to do basic counting and to be able to keep track of their sheep, and people learned how to take care of land and do basic kind of agricultural things. When humanity transitioned to a primarily industrial society, you had to learn basic mathematics and physics and be able to read and write. And we had this mass literacy for the first time. And so now we're in the middle of another transition. We're transitioning from primarily industrial society to a primarily information society. That is not to say that the world of atoms will go away, or we won't have to produce things. That will still be the case. A lot of it's going to be automated. A lot of it is going to be driven by software. There's going to be a lot more people working in software and around the internet than ever before. And so a basic skill is learning how computers work. And how do computers work? They work via code. They, you express your intent for a machine to do a certain set of instructions, and that thing is called coding. And for you to understand how the world works and how software that runs your life, runs your business, allows you to connect with your friends and family works is by actually learning how to code. And it's actually a very useful skill, even outside outside like being a software engineer. There's a lot of coders on Replit that do. We have salespeople that use coding for automation. We have marketing people that use it to spin up quick marketing experiments. We have space hobbyists that use it to kind of track the International Space Stations. We have doctors using it to kind of process certain data and everything. And so you can learn it and you can apply it to your interest or your job. You can have fun with it. You can make really cool stuff. You can use it as a means of creative expression. And so that's the kind of base level why everyone should learn how to code. Now, the next level is you want this to be a primary source of income or even secondary source of income. So maybe you still have a job, but you have an idea for an app and you want to build it. Typically, a lot of people, when they have an idea for an app, they call their distant cousin who they knows how to code, and it's like, hey, I have an idea for an app. And of course, every developer has a million cousins trying to, especially Arab developers, trying to pitch them their idea for an app. So if you learn to code, then you can build your ideas, and so that's a very powerful thing. The possibility of building your ideas, even if you have another job and you have a really compelling idea for software that maybe does something related to your job. And so you can go build it. And then say you want it as a primary source of income. I think software engineering is salaries continue to grow. The need for software engineers continue to grow globally. The really interesting thing that's happening now in software engineering salaries as well is that it's becoming the case that all software engineers globally are competing with other software engineers globally. There are companies that are paying people in Bangladesh the same salary as SF. So like Reddit is one example where they pay everyone SF salaries. Airbnb moved to that. Yeah, San Francisco salaries, which is the highest salaries in the world. And so, Replit, we pay 90% salary. We haven't moved to like fully SF salary, but we might have to. But right now we pay way above market. We pay 90th percentile and sometimes more for people around the world. And so like you instantly have access to a way of making money that's way above your current local market salary. So that's incredibly powerful. I think that's going to really pull a lot of people out of poverty. I think it's going to really decentralize wealth. It's going to, allow more people to learn from some of the best companies in the world in Silicon Valley, because everyone's going remote and hiring everywhere in the world. So that's another reason to learn how to code, because if you're a doctor, you have to physically be at the hospital to do operations or whatever. But and so you have only access to job opportunities in your locale. If you're a software engineer, you can work for a Silicon Valley company getting paid Silicon Valley money. And that's a huge arbitrage opportunity right now.
Yeah, I think this is just a complete revolution in the way that the world works. The fact that you could just be anywhere working for a San Francisco company, it completely changes the dynamic of the possibilities open to people in most of the world, because your options were in many parts of the world, even you get the best job in town and this is your salary. And then if you want to live any better than that, you need to get into organized crime or government, which is usually the same thing, and other nefarious things, and do terrible things, start your own militia or start a drug gang, because it's very difficult to get global, it's very difficult to get the living standards that you see on your TV and your Hollywood movies in many parts of the world using normal means, legal means. But coding allows that. And it just opens the possibilities. Now, I think pretty much anybody in any job in the world needs to ask themselves the question of, should I just quit my career right now and learn to code? Because I think for a very large number of people, that answer is probably correct. Even if you've already put in the answer is probably yes. Even if you put in a very high amount of investment in your current career and your current skill set, in many parts of the world, that's still going to be, and even though it might be a more high status job than being a coder online, it could be a doctor or lawyer or engineer or something like that. It might be financially completely in a different league from what you could achieve if you're coding. But my question here is, what do you think? Like, how easy it is to get a job in coding if you're, say you're an adult professional in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, and you have a job and you've never coded. How easy is it to go start from scratch and then be good enough to get a job? In other words, I guess what'll scare people here is that coding sometimes in their mind, I think, is portrayed as this leap into the unknown where either you go broke or you come out Mark Zuckerberg. And I think there's, if people understood that there's a kind of, a basic, not safety net, but there's a basic kind of job of coder that even if you're not a genius like Mark Zuckerberg and you don't end up making billions, you can still get a reliable job working for somebody just if you learn the basics. Does it have that element of, just like a chef, if you just go to chef school and you learn how to cook things, there'll always be restaurants that'll want to hire you to prepare things for them. Do you think that is true in coding? And as a result of that, would you encourage people to take the leap, or do you think it's more of a kind of more similar to kind of like becoming a professional athlete, where the vast majority of people who try to become soccer players don't make it, but the ones who do succeed enormously?
Well, I'll start with this. I don't know any unemployed software engineer. And I know a lot of unemployed people. Safe, maybe you do too. But if you have friends in Amman or family in Jordan, unemployment is about 30% or something like that. I know unemployed people with masters in civil engineering and a lot of like in-depth civil engineering degrees that are unemployed, right? I know zero people, and I know a lot of coders just by virtue of working at Replit. I know everyone and all my friends in Amman that are programmers with basic skills have jobs. So, that should tell you something about the level of job opportunity available in programming. Second, you don't have to quit anything. You don't have to quit your job to learn how to code. Just like go on YouTube, search, learn JavaScript, and then go to Replit and open the YouTube, pick one of the first ones and open the YouTube and just follow the instructions. And you'll get the hang of it in the next 10 hours. There are actually videos that are 10-hour long to show you Python or JavaScript. We also link a ton of resources from our site. We have some interactive content as well. So you can go to Replit to start your journey there. But, it feels intimidating, but once you open Replit and the editor is ready for you and there's a big green run button, you can start to figure out how it works. It's very interactive. There's a community of people that can also help you. It's actually very low risk for you to get started. So okay, that was, maybe a rebuttal is like people don't have time, but really you don't have time at all. Like, like how many hours you work? Let's say you work, 12-hour days. Did you have weekends? Can you dedicate 10 hours on the weekend? You can probably dedicate 10 hours on the weekend. Maybe you sleep 8 hours a night. So sleep 6 hours for a couple of months instead of 8 hours a night, and dedicate these 2 hours in the morning to learning how to code.
Quit
And so
TV and Netflix.
Yeah, quit TV. Everyone has extra slack in their schedule. I mean, for me, I'm very busy. I have young kids, and I'm running this startup, and I always find inefficiencies and consumption in my day that I could be learning instead. So I'm now learning a lot of AI stuff, and I'm like squeezing an hour a day to learn the stuff. And you could always find an hour a day, like no matter who you are, unless you're like maybe like, really in parts of the world where you probably aren't listening to this podcast. So if you're listening to the podcast, you probably have an hour a day.
You're driving away my listeners, Amjad. Thank you.
And so it's like, you really don't have to quit your job. Just go start learning it. And here's the thing I would say about it is that there is a parallel aspect that you talk about, with athletes. It's not as severe because even the long tail, you make a lot of money.
Yeah, but with athletes, if you don't make it, you don't make anything.
You don't make anything. Yeah, no, it's different than musicians and athletes in that you actually do make a lot of money. But if you want to make insane amount of money, you can also, that's also accessible to you, but you just have to do a lot more work to get there. The thing about programming, and this is like a little different from a lot of different professions, is that people do it for fun. And so you're competing with people who enjoy it. So one thing to kind of try to figure out, and don't judge that in the first month or two, because it's going to be painful. It's always painful. See if you enjoy it. Because if you enjoy it, it's going to just pull you, and you're going to be exploding with ideas, and you're going to be able to become an entrepreneur, or or become one of the best in the world, or become one of the best in your locale, your country, your city, if you really enjoy it. I think like the enjoyment aspect of it was really pulling. Now, all of that to say is that I think dedicate a few hours a week to it, be consistent, push yourself, be okay with a little bit of pain, be okay with feeling a little stupid. There's a ton of resources online. Don't quit for a month or two. And if you find yourself moderately liking it, and if you find yourself that you're getting better at it, then quit your job. And once you quit your job and kind of really dedicate yourself to coding and learn a lot more, and then go figure out how interviews at companies work. And so go learn how to ace interviews, a lot of tutorials, a lot of examples on how to get better at interviewing as a programmer. And then I think you'll be on your way.
Yeah. How do you? Yeah, go ahead.
One caveat is that I do think that there is a certain level of proficiency with computers that is required. So I think there are some people who maybe didn't grow up with computers, who don't have an intuitive understanding of computers. A bunch of journalists, like 5 years ago, telling like coal miners who went out of job, learn to code. I thought that was inhumane, right? Because if you're a coal miner, you're probably not very good with computers. You're good with your hands and all of that. And so I think just telling like everyone, okay, you can learn to code and you can just like go make $100,000 a year is not like a blanket statement. I think there's like, if you know how to drive a computer, and if you know how the internet works a little bit, if you have some basic proficiency with computer skills, I think you can learn how to code, but that's sort of necessary.
Yeah. So what do you think in terms of, you learn to code, but then should you focus on trying to get small gigs to build up your experience and make a little small amounts of money? Or do you think, keep learning until you develop a very strong level of proficiency, or maybe get a degree from somewhere, or get some kind of certificate, and then apply for a job at a big corporation. Do you have any kind of thoughts on this choice for people starting out?
The really cool thing about programming, Safe, and which makes it a little less fiat than a lot of the other things, is that there's really like nobody puts any emphasis on certificates. Like going through this checkboxing exercise of like, if you're a lawyer, you need to pass the bar or whatever. There's none of that. And in essence, that makes it a more honest labor market, right? Because you're judged by your work. So how do you judge? Like, if you're a doctor, I can't kind of go online and look at all your, patients that you've treated and the record of all of that. If you're a programmer, I can go to Replit or GitHub and see all the code that you've written over time. And I actually can see with Replit, you can see with the resolution of like the characters you've typed. With GitHub, there's also this concept of commits. You can see like how many commits they're making a day. And you can see how hard people work. You can see the kind of projects they worked on. And you can see their entire portfolio. You can go run their code. You can go debug it. And so that makes it, again, like a kid from Jordan could invent like an open source project and get a job and get a visa to America, right? That's something that doesn't happen with other professions. Like there's no way in the world like a lawyer would be discovered in the same way, right? You just have to go through all this bureaucracy in order to make something of yourself. With programming, you can skip all that crap. And so, yes, if you can get gigs, get gigs. If you can do side projects, do side. Always be building. Like even as you're learning, once you get like the basics down, like functions and if statements and whatever, start building a project. Start building like a simple chatbot. Go to Replit, see what people are building in Replit. You can go and remix the project and see how people are doing that. We have this gallery of projects that people have built. You can see the code behind each project and how they built it. And so go change something about it. Go change how the dialogue in a game works, or what the color of the ball, or whatever it is. And so over time you learn how these applications work, and then you'll also build a portfolio. And then when you apply to jobs, you could just like include a link to that portfolio. And that really what gets you like, for me, as an employer, I almost never look at university anymore. I actually see like a Ivy League university as an anti-signal. I just go straight to like what you've built and what you've worked on.
Yeah, I think in the case of computer programming, it's hard to argue that an expensive university degree is a good signal, because everything you want is pretty much online, and you could be out there learning by doing, rather than learning by spending 4 years essentially at a country club experience. So I totally understand why you would, I'd take the guy in Bangladesh over the guy from the Ivy League, even at the same pay, probably, if they had the similar skills. Just, based on that metric, I'd take the person who didn't sign up for $300,000 of expensive country club for 4 year limited membership.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you made a better economic decision that shows good judgment.
Exactly. So basically, everybody probably benefits from learning to code. A couple of caveats is, I guess you said, if you're extremely not a computer person, I guess also if you're pretty rich and your time is very valuable and you're highly productive, then it doesn't make sense to take time out of your job. If you're a highly paid CEO and you're doing well for yourself, then maybe learning to code is going to reduce your earnings so much by taking away from your time. I guess those are the two kind of
actually, the latter one I'm not entirely sure, because like the mental models you learn from learning how to code will actually help you run your business. Like I think about, like, a lot of times when I'm running my business, I think about computer science concepts. Like I think our organization is a tree structure, and like, you know, how do you make organizations like more fluid, increase the connection between people, and just like the mental models you get from computing are actually very useful for like any kind of job. Especially, I think a CEO job is, a lot of it is engineering. You're engineering the organization. The strategy is sort of a form of a program that you're running. And so I think it'll help you kind of even with that.
Definitely. No, I agree. And I did learn to code when I was at university. I took 2 C++ courses and I did very well, actually. I got I remember in one of the exams, I was the only one in the whole class who got a full mark on the exam. So I still remember that it really did help make my brain better. Like it was like taking steroids for the brain almost. It just blew up my brain and made me think in a much more systematic way. So I agree with you. But here's another question now in terms of, so there's definitely, benefits for whatever job that you're doing if you start to learn as a programmer and you can introduce these benefits. But what about the idea that artificial intelligence is going to obsolete programming? And in particular, you've been sharing on your Twitter all of this, the new AI bots that you've been interacting with, and you showed me some pretty incredible things. I mean, at some point, Amjad shared with me, this was when I think it was GPT-3 was the name of the bot. Was that it? Yeah. When GPT-3 first came out, Amjad told it to make an interview. That was when the Fiat Standard, my book, was coming out, or when it was about to come out. And he told them to make an interview between me and Pierre Rochard and Michael Goldstein. And it was a long interview of the 3 of us talking, and it was all completely generated. And I remember reading it and thinking, wow, that's actually interesting. And I genuinely think, actually this was before the Fiat Standard went to print, because I remember reading this and thinking, that's a good way of framing it. I remember making some changes in the Fiat Standard based on what your what your book had what your bot had recommended. Right. So, the capabilities of these machines are becoming completely amazing to us. I mean, beyond anything that I would have expected as soon as as early as 3 years ago. So, and you've also been doing them. You've also been telling them to code things so you can make them make an app. So then, why should I need to get my hands dirty with C++ and code and learning commands when I could just download one of these and tell them, hey, build me an app that does this, or do this for me, do that for me?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and it gets into the fundamental nature of AI. Some of the sci-fi view of what artificial intelligence is. It's like this autonomous being that has its own desires and wants and whatnot. But it actually, it's not. Like, the reason that humans, whether you believe in God, there's a spirit for humans, or you believe in evolution and there is a evolutionary sort of survival instinct in humans, there's this prime force that's moving humans to have certain desires and wants and needs and all of that. And AI, no matter how sophisticated, is going to be a tool. If an AI knows how to write code, it's going to be a really good tool for writing code. But it's never going to have like a spontaneously novel idea on how to make an app, right? Or at least the current generation of tools. Like, maybe in the future, I think it's at minimum decades away, if at all possible, to actually have a human-like AI. But right now, AI is still a tool. It's a useful tool. You need to learn how to use it. I think learning how to code allows you to learn how AIs work, and allows you to program AIs and use it to use it in your applications and use it to become more productive. With regards to coding, right now there's what you talked about, GPT-3. These are language models that have been trained on massive amounts of data, and they become really good at completing text. So you give it a piece of text, a prompt, they call it, and you hit enter, and it generates text based on the likelihood of that text, following that previous text, right? So if I said, this is an interview between Saifedean, Pierre, and Michael on the noted podcast, and then hit enter, and it will like start generating that, like what the script is. I think I give it another prompt, which is they're discussing the upcoming book Fiat Standard. And then so same thing with coding, you have to generate the prompt, and the prompt could be something like, the starting of the code that you're trying to write. And again, it's a tool, and it can make it possible to create small functions that you don't have to write end to end, right? So a lot of the code, it's trained on all this open source code out there. So you don't have to keep repeating yourself. So it can make you more productive. So we're building this now at Replit, where as you're coding, the AI will figure out that this piece of code, it's seen before, and you don't have to write it again. It will just suggest it to you. It's like, hey, I know how to write this function that gets the prime numbers. Do you want me to write it for you? And then you say yes or no. Say yes, it completed for you. So it'll save you a lot of the rotes kind of things. It can also detect patterns. So as you're writing code, a lot of times there's repetition, and it can figure out the pattern. And it's like, okay, I know what this human is trying to do. Let me complete that for you. So again, you have the agency, you're programming, you're designing your application. It's just augmentation for you to kind of complete your intent. It's still your intent, your desire, and the AI is there to complete your intent. And we're also going to leverage the AI to make it easier to learn how to program, to kind of, whenever you get stuck, you ran into issues, the AI will explain. We have this feature, if you're a paid customer, that explains the code for you. And so this is like a great learning feature. You can copy paste code from the internet, right click explain, and the AI will actually explain it in human language. We'll tell you what this code will do. So fundamentally, the way I view AI in coding and AI in general, it's this human augmentation. It's a human augmentation tool, and it's going to be like that for a long time. And again, like what I said earlier, like I think programming is the last profession to get automated. If programming is fully automated, then you don't need humans anymore, because then like the computer will program the next iteration of its code, and then the next iteration will create the next iteration, and it'll have this rapid improvement cycle and invent something that's beyond imagination. And if it needs to automate a certain thing, it will write the code for that. And so programming is the most defensible skill from automation, because if that gets solved, then there's human labor is not needed anywhere at all. And so if you're worried about automation, the best thing to learn is programming.
Yeah, I agree with you. In general, I think the term artificial intelligence, I find to be an oxymoron. I don't think it's a good term to use, because I think the way that I like to think of it is intelligence is something that only a living thing can do when looking out for its own interest. So you can program a machine to do whatever you want, but that it's still your intelligence that is commanding it to do those things. You're the one who has the will that is being actualized by that machine. So I could never make the machine intelligent as long as I make the machine, because at the end of the day, whatever it does, it's something that I've programmed, it's something that I've put in, it's something, and that's true from a machine as simple as a hammer all the way up to GPT-3. At the end of the day, it's not intelligent. The person who programmed it is the one who's intelligent. And all it is doing is bringing about his intelligent ideas about the world into existence. And similarly, so when they say, the computer has beaten Kasparov at chess, it's not the computer that's beaten Kasparov. It's the engineers behind the computer who used these machines in order to beat Kasparov. And so in my mind, and this is influenced by the Austrians and Mises and his discussion of human action, intelligence is something it's that only humans can do. It's something that you're a human being, you have a will, you have an end, and you are the end. You know, you want to have more apples tomorrow, you want to have a bigger house, you want to have a better car. And so you work toward that end and you perform tasks toward that. So in order to do that, you need to learn math, you need to carry heavy things, you need to learn to code, whatever it is. You do those things because you're driven by that intelligent desire to achieve the end. And so I don't think that's something that you can replicate in a machine, because whatever you put into the machine, it's still you who's putting into it. So you're the will, you're the motivating will about it. That's why I think I prefer the machine learning term over the artificial intelligence term, because I think intelligence is a purely human thing.
Yeah, and I actually think that the Austrian first principles thinking on human action is actually a very, very good model for understanding how automation will kind of work, and like what you just said actually makes a lot of sense. I'll say another thing is that these new GPT-3 is a language model. They call them large language models, and the way they work is more like, you know, I'm relying on the collective intelligence of the internet, right? Because they're trained on the internet and they're generating output based on what the entire internet has generated in the past. And so, like, one way to think about it is this is more of network augmentation. You are relying on the fullness of creative output of every human that this model has trained on, right? And so in a lot of ways, it's just synthesizing human action and allowing you to command it in new and interesting ways.
Yeah, this is a topic that I discuss in my next book, the Principles of Economics textbook, where I discuss the economics of technology and technological innovation, and then end with the discussion of artificial intelligence, which I just kind of summarized here. I think, yeah, you're right. There's a huge power in using Austrian principles for understanding tech. I look forward to sharing that chapter with you and seeing what you think of it. I'll send you the draft. Dorian has a question for you. Dorian?
Thanks, Amjad, for this. A lot of career advices here, so very thankful. I have got a question. If we consider a person who is not like IT native and who doesn't know anything about coding, what would be the one language that they should learn that will be enough for them to get a job and to progress in the next 5 years?
So Python, they call it the second best language for every application. And so, which makes it like on average, the best language. And so every sort of application domain has a, specialized language that could sort of help you do. But Python tends to be this very general purpose language. It also tends to be more beginner friendly than a lot of other languages because it has less ambiguity. It has less syntax. There's a lot of nice things about Python. And so I would definitely recommend Python because it just, it has this optionality to it.
Thanks.
Peter has a question.
Thanks for that, Amjad. That was a really interesting discussion. I had a question about how you've overcome problems due to the free computing power that Replit offers. So in particular, I've read on your Twitter about you having lots of problems with people using the Replit platform to mine cryptocurrencies. And I was just really curious about how you overcame that problem and what sorts of defenses you put up on Replit to stop people using the platform and the computing power for that purpose.
Yeah, so when you provide free compute on the internet, you open yourself to a lot of abuse. One type of abuse is to create a lot of phishing sites and phishing programs. Another type of abuse is to use your platform to attack other sites and other platforms and other users, meaning you do a DOS attack. Replit is powerful enough that it can generate like a massive DOS attack against someone. And finally, you can siphon compute to mine shitcoins. And so we've never seen anyone try to mine Bitcoin in any meaningful way other than play, but because a lot of these altcoins, you can just like mine them from anywhere, and so we've had these army of people probably in like farms in China or Russia that come to Replit to mine Monero, whatever other coin, and really siphon compute and steal compute from us to generate these hashes, and so it gone to be a really messed up issue, not just for us, for big companies like Microsoft and any company that provides compute for free. But we actually solved it. It requires, I can't say how we solved it just because it's sort of a bit of a trade secret, but also you don't want the scammers and attackers to know how. But we've been able to shut down mining in a meaningful way. Another attack is the people using your network to attack other users. And so we've had this issue for a long time. And so part of what makes Replit really hard is because on the one side, we have to build this really hard product. We have to build an IDE, community, and this cloud computing engine, but also we have to protect it. And protecting it becomes really difficult. And so we had at some point, these dark web hackers that figure out a vulnerability with Replit to generate a lot of different compute resources and sell these resources to attack other people for crypto. And we in 2018, we spent like 2-3 months fighting them. They would keep coming back and finding different holes and ways to abuse our network for these purposes. But again, we shut them down. And I think the value of, I did a lot of cybersecurity work. I did a lot of hacking when I was a kid as well. And so that came into handy. I know how to think like them. We've done some social engineering as well. And we ended up hacking the hackers in some cases. We figured out their computers. We launched a reverse attack on them. And so, in 2018, around November, December, January, it was a period where I was sleeping like 1 hour a night and just like spending all my time fighting these hackers. And, in a lot of ways we won. We still deal with this. We have a very good security team right now. But it has been really difficult and kind of makes you appreciate how shitty shitcoins are.
Yeah, it's good to have you on our side with all of these capabilities, and I can only imagine how much work it is. And I hope other big tech companies take some heart from it. Parag, if you're listening, time to start putting in 1 hour nights so that we could get rid of the Twitter bots. It saddens me to say it, but I know personally of people who have lost $24,000 sending money to Instagram and Twitter bots pretending to be me. $24,000 is the tally that I know of so far. So it's extremely depressing to know this is happening. Imagine some of my friends have sent money to people thinking they sent it to me, and it's some of these bots.
Well, I actually think that Bitcoin could also play a hand in solving this, like having some way to do micropayments. And so we want to provide our service for free, but we want to be able to know who's a bot and who's a human. And there's no way to do that right now, or at least as close to free as possible. maybe we want to charge small amounts for certain services that has the potential to get abused. And so again, in like this future where everyone uses Bitcoin, everyone using Lightning, you can you can say like to verify yourself, like, stake like, a couple thousand Satoshis. And if you don't abuse anything, you can, get them on the way out or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the ways in which this could change. I mean, once we have, and this is what's being built right now, but once we have a big, giant, reliable infrastructure around moving Lightning around, when you don't need to reveal all of your information every time that you want to send a small payment, because this is really the cost of engaging in micropayments. The reason is that every time that you make a micropayment, it's not just that you're paying a cent or a half a cent or a tenth of a cent. That's not the cost. The cost is that you're revealing your information and subjecting yourself to a tax that becomes uneconomical. If Lightning solves this, I think it's enormous. Nathan, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious how you view large legacy ERP systems like SAP and those. How do you see those things evolving? I mean, those have been around for years. They're monstrous. They're overcomplicated. They're hard to maintain. Do you have any thoughts on how those things might be attacked, given your tools?
I haven't thought about it, to be honest. I haven't thought about it too much, and maybe I should. Maybe it's a good market to go after and make it more programmable. And I will say this though, I think that I think you can take any legacy software and you can put it in the cloud, make it more accessible, make sure that UX is better, have a platform on top of it that makes it easier to extend and make it easier to script. And I think you could have a better product than a lot of these legacy ERP providers.
And Pavel has a question as well.
Yeah, thank you, Amjad. It's very interesting discussion. So I would just like to ask what's your opinion about these no-code or low-code tools that have been quite popular in the last couple of years? Would you recommend beginners to kind of start with these and then maybe augment their programming understanding with learning, programming languages like Python or JavaScript? Or do you see a future when we will abstract programming languages so much that people will simply program visually? And how do you see this?
Maybe I have a bit of a contrarian view here, but I think that, there are actually some research showing that a lot of the drag and drop tools, a lot of, they try to teach children computational thinking using some visual programming methods, and they found that it's not really transferable to actual coding. So if you take a cohort and you teach them some no-code tool, and you take another cohort without no-code experience, and you try to teach both coding, the no-code cohort does not do better at coding. So the transfer, the value is not there. So I don't think it makes, if you really want to learn coding, just go learn coding. These things will not really help you. They're like a spreadsheet, that you can learn that pretty easily. And my view in no code, I think they're useful, and I think they provide a value, and a lot of people who do not want to learn coding can use them to do some basic computing. And I'm like a big fan of anything that gives end users more power. That being said, I think text is a very good interface for interacting with the computer, more than visual interfaces, because text is how we write and how we think. reading and writing is using just basic characters and basic text, and you can express something very dense with just text, and you can glance at it and read it and be able to communicate a lot of value. With visual type abstractions, it just actually turns out to like if you want to do anything really complex, it will create a lot of clutter and actually will not deliver that sort of information density you get from text. And the other thing is like text is like the universal interface. Like think about Google search. Like Google search is this universal text interface to the internet, right? Like you search Google, you get some links, but also sometimes you get a calculator, you get a widget, you get a translator, you get a, there's a lot of these mini applications on Google, and they're all driven by text. And you can think about it as like a very simple form of programming as well. And so I think text as an interface is actually a very good interface. So I don't see the reason that visual programming needs to be or is better. Now one way it could be better is as you're learning, kind of visualizing the state of the program is really interesting. And so as a learning tool, that could be interesting. And finally, like, what's happening with the AI stuff that we talked about, it's making textual programming a lot more productive. And so that doesn't apply to visual programming. So the tools are going to get better with text, but the tools are not like, drag and drop will always be the same. It will always be drag and drop. Maybe you could imagine a world where it's like in VR, your drag and drop things, maybe that'll get better, but text is getting better every day.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of text in general. I sometimes used to say everything that's not plain text on the internet is a waste of time. It's exaggeration, and it's bad for the sales of this podcast. Please don't listen to me. Listen to the podcast. This is not a waste of time. But I think text is just such a powerful way of communicating so much ideas so quickly. If the person communicating just sits down and writes clearly, and then the person reads it, it's so much faster than everything else. Pavel was laughing because he knows how much I hate meetings and how much I like emails. Okay, well, Amjad, this has been absolutely enlightening and fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's truly inspiring what you guys are doing with Replit. I wish you all the best of luck, and send my best regards to Haya and the kids. And really, I'd love to get you back here or talk more and more about how you guys are advancing and your Bitcoin plans. So thanks again.
Of course, my pleasure. This has been really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.